Hi everyone, how's everybody doing? Hope you're all having a blessed day. Just another day here, and I wanted to spend a couple moments with you all talking about a certain Adventist subject here, expounding Adventist truth, and just wanted to spend a couple moments on dating leading up to marriage, divorce and remarriage. Not so much on the divorce and remarriage part, but more on the dating leading up to marriage. Jesus says in Matthew 19, he's talking about this stuff. The first thing he says is that the only reason God condones and accepts divorce is if there is fornication, if there's adultery involved. Now you guys might be saying, well, what about, domestic violence, abuse, and abandonment, and irreconcilable differences, and all this stuff? By the grace of God, I'll be uploading another study on that about marriage and divorce and remarriage, specifically addressing those issues by the grace of God. And but right now, Jesus says in Matthew 19, Jesus says, when you're married, he says, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Let no man separate. What God has joined together. Jesus quotes Genesis and says, when you are married, the two shall be one flesh. That word, that Greek word, joined together, means to be yoked. God says we must be equally yoked with whoever we are marrying. When you think of yoke, you think of, in biblical terms, a yoke of oxen. Two oxen are yoked together to plow the field. If one ox is doing half of its work and the other ox is doing its full work, it's not going to work. It's incompatible. It's not going to work efficiently. Just like a team of horses, they all have their own place. Dog sleds, all these dogs are strategized to be in their own positions because they each do something for a purpose of pulling that sled. If one dog is down, if one horse is not doing its work, then the whole thing is going to operate inefficiently. Same thing in a marriage. We have to be equally yoked. And the problem is, with God's people today, we don't take this advice seriously. We are infatuated with love. We just want to rush into things. And reason is, how are y'all doing? And reason leaves our minds. We don't want to seek counsel. What the pastor tells us, what our parents tells us, what the elders say. We lay that aside and we just love that person and we just want to rush into marriage and we'll deal with the consequences later. And then when the consequences come after, like Ellen White says, when the novelty of marriage is over, reality sets in, then it hits us as to the mistake in marriage that we did by marrying the wrong person. And then we file for divorce for irreconcilable differences and so forth. And then Jesus says that if we divorce other than for adultery, we commit fornication, we commit adultery if the reason for divorce is not adultery. He says if you just divorce for no reason, then you're going to go marry somebody else. That other person is going to marry somebody else, and that is adultery. And that is something that is happening in the church a lot. Ellen White talks about this becoming I believe she says becoming a sister to Babylon when we just marry and divorce and remarriage just like that. And the marriage standard has not been kept. Again, we'll deal with this more in the video to come by God's grace. But again, we have to be equally yoked. We have to talk about when you date, take time, get to know the person. What does that person believe in terms of how to raise a family? How are you going to teach your kids? What values are you going to teach your children? Do those values align with your values? In this day and age, if you want to talk about politics, what do you believe in politics? Do you believe in this? Do you believe in that? What are your values? What about, what do you think about financial? How you run finances? Are you a big spender? Are you a big saver? How is that going to equal out? And so forth. We have to be equally yoked. These are things that, like Ellen White says, and again, I'm quoting these passages from the top of my head. I'm paraphrasing it, but God willing, I will have it all on the comment section and pin it so you can all read it. She says to a guy, the woman that you're going to marry, the young lady that you're going to marry, the list of things that you have to look for, red flags, green flags. Does she fit this whole criteria? And same way for a woman. She addresses the woman. Hey, the young man that you're going to marry, does he fit all these biblical criteria, these red flags, these green flags? These are things that if we read counsel, if we take advantage of this material that God gave us, it would help us avoid misery when we are already in the marriage relationship. And that's the problem. We don't want to read. We don't want to take counsel. Read messages to young people. I believe the last 8 chapters talks about this stuff. Read Adventist Home. Same thing. The last 7, 8, 9 chapters talk about this. Read letters to young lovers. These are all inspired writings from God giving advice and counsel about marriage situation for a good, long-lasting, happy marriage. What are the consequences if we unite with an unbeliever? We become unequally yoked. That is, I believe that's 2 Corinthians chapter 6, I believe Paul talks about this. He says, be ye not unequally yoked with unbelievers. What does that mean? What does that look like? Oh, I'm an Adventist. I believe in the Word of God, and you're marrying a non-Adventist. Might be a Christian or might not, but they don't hold to the same values and truths that you do. So when it comes time to, if you have children, well, what are you going to teach your kids? Well, one says that he wants to take their kids to a Sunday church to worship on Sunday, a false Sabbath. And you know the truth. So what are you going to do? Now the spirit of compromise comes in, because if you don't compromise, there's going to be war. Why? Because you're unequally yoked. It's not working efficiently. And we see this many times in the Word of God. What happens to God's people when they become unequally yoked with unbelievers? We see this when Israel was at Baal Peor, and they were seduced into the Jewish women to the sons of Midian, and the Israeli men to the daughters of Midian. And they were seduced to marry these people, these heathens, and it introduced idolatry and false worship. How are you? And it introduced idolatry and false worship. Going forward, you see in the time of Samson, unequally yoking himself, marrying non-believers, Philistine women. Did not end well for Samson. We see Solomon marrying multiple wives. That's one red flag. But also these women came from countries that were heathens. And when you read the Spirit of Prophecy, I believe is Prophets and Kings. I believe she makes a statement that this was going to be a scourge to Israel. This was going to be a dangerous seduction into false worship, the things that Solomon did. Going forward, you come to the days of Nehemiah and Ezra, and how the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, because they were seduced, and they started intermarrying with the heathen, which brought in false worship, which brought in a idolatry, and a work of reformation again needed to be done. So we see this over and over again in the Bible. Now, can an unbeliever become a believer? And the answer is yes. And once they're a believer and they're in the truth, then yes, you can marry them as believers, and you'll be equally yoked. We see this with the example of Rahab being a heathen, and she converts and becomes a God-fearing woman, and she's also one of the great grandmothers of Christ. She's in the lineage. We see this with Ruth, when Ruth left her false gods and decided to follow Naomi into Israel, and she says, wherever you go, I'll follow. Your God will become my God. But notice, these two women stood up for God. They stood up for God first. Then they entered into the marriage relationship sometime after. And what we like to reason in our minds is, hey, she's an unbeliever now, or he's an unbeliever now, and through the dating process, I'll bring him to church and he'll convert. No, he has to convert because God speaks to him. Not because of you, not because of her. No, we have to be equally yoked. So when God says what God has joined together, what God has yoked together, let no man put asunder. And in Adventism, we have, to a certain degree, we have laid aside the standards of marriage the standards of divorce and adultery and fornication, a different type of adultery and fornication, is leavening the spirituality of our churches. And a lot of people, especially ministers, don't like to talk about this because some of those ministers are also guilty of this. So by God's grace, we're going to talk more about this in a future video very soon. And yeah, let me know what you think in the comments section. Put a like, subscribe, and have a blessed day.